Today we're going to be talking about why it was so difficult to get the Constitution ratified. First of all, writing the Constitution was not an easy thing. It happened in the summer, the hot summer of 1787, and there was a lot of heated debate that went into this Constitution. But the great part about it is it was done by educated men, and different men, as Patrick Henry says, different men sometimes look at the same subject in different lights. But that's good, because then you find compromises and you represent both sides. So we had representatives from all the colonies at that convention, and they did a really great job. But then when they were finished, when they had tabled slavery and just kind of ignored it, they had to get it ratified. Now, it would have never been ratified if slavery had been abolished in the Constitution. So they just kind of put that under the table for later. And unfortunately, it did come up later in a big way. But if you look at this sheet, the people that were in favor of the Constitution were called Federalists. They wanted a strong federal government. And the people on the other side were the Anti-Federalists. Now today, which party do you think is more Federalist, likes to kind of have the federal government manage people's lives, and the one that's more anti-federalist and doesn't want and wants the government messing with them as little as possible? Do you have any idea? Oh, well, then I won't tell you. I can tell. Do you have an idea? For today's parties.
Republican is more federal?
No. They are the ones that don't want, they want as little government interference as possible. Okay, Thomas Jefferson was an anti-federalist. He thought that the people should be left alone with as few laws as possible. So the Constitution had to find a balance on that. It had to make the people that were in favor of a federal government, a strong federal government, and those that weren't, it had to find a balance to pass it. Now, let's look at the side that want the Constitution. They were afraid that if the people had too much freedom, that it would be bad. They thought, you know, not all the people are that wise. Not all of them are all educated. Not all of them understand about government. If we give them too much freedom, it could be disastrous. So they wanted a limited popular election. In other words, you had to elect people. They wanted to put limits on who you could elect. But the Anti-Federalists feared that the Constitution took too much power away from the people. And they wanted the people to have more power. As far as the government itself, of course, the Federalists wanted it to be strong, and the Anti-Federalists wanted it to be weaker. But let's look at state power. The people in favor of the Constitution believe that the states should be ultimately subordinate to the federal government. So they said, we can have state governments, but they're all going to be under the umbrella of the federal government, so the final word will be the federal government. But the Anti-Federalists didn't like that. They thought each state has its unique personality, and each state has different needs, and so they didn't want that to happen. They believed that the states should be more powerful than the government because the states were closer to the people. They knew their own people. And this was a big debate, and we're going to look at how they solved that. But can you understand the points of view of both sides? The people who wanted more unity felt that the states should have certain, be under their own systems, but they should be accountable to the federal government. And the Anti-Federalists thought that the states should operate independently and do their thing, and that what they decided to do could not be overruled by the federal government. And you can imagine which people would be most likely to be in that camp. What we choose to do can't be overruled by the federal government. What people at that time would have been the most worried about that? Think, think, think. What were the big issues of the day? Okay, I'm one of those people. I don't want the federal government telling me what I can and can't do in my state. Because in my state, we do it this way. And even though your state doesn't like it, we want to keep doing it that way, and we don't want to give that power to the federal government. What issue would I most likely be worried about? Slavery, you bet. Don't tell me I can't have my slaves. I don't want the government to be able to outlaw slavery. I think the state should be stronger than the government so we can protect what we want to do the way we want to do it. So that was a big issue for the slave states. But can you understand the side that wanted unity, that wanted us to have some cohesion among the states so that we could operate as a unit, especially in times of war or things like that? They wanted us to be united. So both had their own point of view. And the Bill of Rights, the Federalists said, we don't need a Bill of Rights because the state governments already have them. But the Anti-Federalists said, if you don't have that written into your Constitution, we're not going to approve it because we don't want any tyranny. We want, in your words, written down that you're going to protect our right of free speech, our right to bear arms. These 10 laws that we finally put in, the 10 amendments to the Constitution, were the Bill of Rights. Does anyone know what some of the Bill of Rights are? I just named 2 of them. Does anybody know any others? Freedom of speech. I bet Mrs. Barnes can tell us some because they're stuck on a magnet right up there beside her. What are some of the Bill of Rights? These were important. All right, number 1 was, of course, freedom of worship, speech, and press, the right of citizens to bear arms, assures that troops will not be forced to be quartered in private homes. That was a big deal. Remember, the colonists got so mad when Britain said, we're sending an army to enforce the laws there, and you have to take them in your homes and feed them and take care of them. People didn't like that kind of invasion of their privacy. Number 4, guards against unreasonable search and someone can't, or seizure of property. They can't do that without a warrant. Number 5 requires indictment by a grand jury for major crimes. Number 6 guarantees a speedy public trial by an unbiased jury for criminal offenses. Number 7 guarantees trial by jury in civil cases for anything valued more than $20. That's just about everything. Number 8 prohibits excessive bail or cruel and unusual punishment. Number 9 confirms that people also have rights other than those mentioned in the Constitution. Now there we go, building in some room for slack, right? People have rights other than the ones we're mentioning right here. And number 10 declares that the powers not delegated to the federal government belong to the states or to the people. So this was what they wanted in the Constitution. Even still, it took a long time to get this Constitution approved. It wasn't approved finally. I think the last state finally got on board in, it was Rhode Island again, I think, and I don't know the exact date. It's in your textbook. But it was, I think we inaugurated George Washington in 1789 before the last state had finally joined in on this Constitution thing. So it wasn't easy to write our Constitution. It was a lot of work, and it was miserable. Now, you know how they dressed back then? They had the suit coats on with the ruffly sleeves, those layers of ruffles that they would use for, by the way, for handkerchiefs. And they had their tie here and their long pants and their leggings and whatever, and it was inside the building with the windows shut because they didn't want people eavesdropping on a hot, humid summer in Pennsylvania. And so in that sweat box, our nation was born. And it took a lot of debate and a lot of compromising to make that happen. And I think that's great. If just a couple people who were of the same view had gotten together and written the Constitution, who knows what we'd have ended up with. When someone takes power like a dictator and he calls all the shots, that's usually not beneficial to the people, right? But these were the people, and some of the most educated ones, really trying to come up with something that would protect all the rights of the people. All right, now let's look inside your thing that I just handed out to you. This is on the American Revolution. We're going to talk first about, I think we've gone over the causes, but let's go over them in an organized way. The causes of the American Revolution. You know, at first we didn't want to revolt. We wanted to just work things out with Great Britain, right? I mean, a lot of people really didn't want revolution. But the taxes imposed by the British, which hurt American merchants and consumers so much financially, really upset the colonists. So the taxes imposed by the British is number 1. And I'm going to call on you to name these 6 things by memory in a minute. So number 1 is taxes. Number 2, incidents that angered the British, like the harassment of their soldiers. And number 3, incidents that angered the colonists other than the taxes, such as not allowing them to trade with anyone but Britain, having to house British soldiers, not being allowed to appoint their own governors or vote on their own taxes. Those things annoyed the colonists. So the fourth thing was sensationalism, or exaggeration of the British mistreatment. That was really played upon, we saw by Sam Adams in the Boston Massacre. So this working up of the crowd mentality helped, but one of the most powerful things was Thomas Paine's common sense, which convinced a lot of people who were on the fence that separation was really the logical thing to do. So we're going to name them together, and then I'm going to just point to someone to say them, and you're going to say them this way. Taxes, incidents that angered the British, incidents that angered the colonists, sensationalism. Oh, number 5, I skipped. The independent nature of Americans. Why were Americans of such an independent nature, do you think?
Because they were in a whole other continent.
Yeah, and they had been there for 150 years and they'd taken care of themselves, right? Nobody helped them, nobody babied them. They had learned to be very independent. They had carved homes out of the wilderness. When they arrived, look at those early colonies, how many people died and struggled through the weather and how horrible it was. These people had to be tough and independent to survive in this new world, especially in the beginning. Plus, a lot of criminals were sent over there from England. That was a punishment to send them to America. And people like that have already operated separate from society. And so they had very independent ways of thinking. But was King George, Americans were independent and King George was inflexible. Do you think that makes a good combination? So what I put here for number 5 is the independent nature of Americans versus the king's inflexibility was a formula for revolt. So here we have it. So let's say them together. Number 1 is taxes. Number 2 is, number 3, good. Number 4, number 5, okay, and number 6, common sense. Thomas Paine's common sense. Now, is it common sense to you that these things would cause a revolution? Okay, I want you to try to look at these and imagine that you are a colonist and tell me which of these things do you think would upset you the most? Look at them and try to put yourself back there in that time period. Now, you don't have all the conveniences you have today. You work hard. You're either going to be some kind of merchant or craftsman, if you're in the New England states, or farmers. Which one of these do you think would upset you the most?
Taxes.
Taxes for you? What would it be for you?
Being so independent, because it's kind of like, you know, you're like almost 30 and your parents won't let you leave the house.
Yeah, you're almost 30 and your parents won't let you leave the house, right?
Having to have British soldiers.
Having to take strangers into your house. I wouldn't like that either.
Same as her, then is it not allowed to trade with anyone but Britain? Yeah.
Not allowed to what?
To trade with anybody but Britain.
Yeah, that was really annoying. Who else has one? They know which one would bother them the most. Yes. Taxes for you? Anybody else have an opinion? What's yours?
Not being allowed to appoint somebody like a governor.
Yeah, not being able to choose your own representatives. Remember, what was the famous slogan of the revolutionaries? Yeah, we should decide our own taxes. I think one of the hardest ones for me would be, and it's similar to what you said, it would be the king's inflexibility. Here we write these reasonable letters, our demands are reasonable, and he just keeps writing us back, no, little children, you can't do that, I'm the boss. And that would really get under my skin, especially when America was like a just coming of age adult. They were just coming through their teens and they want freedom, and the parent is going squash, squash, squash. And that wouldn't go over with me at all. So these are the reasons, and your next quiz is going to be on these reasons. Now what I'd like you to do is tell me some of the incidents that angered the British without looking at your paper. What are some? Yes. The Boston Tea Party, for sure. What else?
The mistreatment of British soldiers.
Yeah, the mistreatment of British soldiers.
The Boston Massacre.
The Boston Massacre.
Sugar.
That upset the British. That upset the colonists. Oh, you know what? You're right in a way, Bill, because the colonists' resistance to pay those taxes really upset the British. It really did. And so that's true. The resistance to taxes upset them a lot. And then, of course, there was the tar and feathering of their captain who was bringing the tea. That was pretty awful. What incidents angered the colonists without looking? Give me some. Yes.
The Boston Massacre.
The colonists.
Yeah.
Yes, that would work both ways. Yes.
Having to house the British soldiers.
Having to house soldiers. Bill. The Stamp Act.
All the acts.
All the acts.
All the taxes.
Yeah, which were the acts. All the taxes. Anything else? Yes.
Only being able to trade with Britain.
Yeah, restrictions on trade. So I think even if I wasn't an American, I would be sympathetic with the colonists here. But I also believe that if I was in England, I would tend to be sympathetic with my own country, because I would have my king telling me they're just a bunch of wild children and they want to have their own way and we need to control them, and I would probably go for that. But if I think just looking at it from time and distance, England would have been really smart to give in. If they would just let colonists have representation in Parliament, if they could have representatives there, if they would have let the colonists come up, they could have said, we need to tax some items for this and that reason. You know, if they'd let the colonists have a voice in the taxes, if he'd just done some of these things, I think we might still be British. But that's not the way it turned out, is it? Okay, so also you see number 2 is the pre-war events, that you've mostly memorized all of these. So your next quiz is on the causes of the revolution and the pre-war events that were catalysts towards the colonists getting more and more angry. So we know Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Declaratory Act, Townshend Acts, Boston Massacre, Tea Tax, Boston Tea Party, Intolerable Acts, and the First Continental Congress meeting, the shot at Lexington, and then the Second Continental Congress, which still wrote a letter offering to make peace with Britain, which was ignored, and then there was war, Common Sense, and the Declaration of Independence. So those were all things that led up to the final revolt. So those things are what you're going to need to know for your quiz on all the way at Friday. So see, we've got to jump on it, Bill. You're going to be good, all you guys.